Hi, this is Pastor Cheryl Kincaid, and today I want to talk to you about the power of personal Christian testimony. You know, I grew up in the church, and one of the things I used to love to do was to sit in the back pew, while Pastor Shaw said goodbye and shook people's hands, and hear the stories that the adults would tell Pastor Shaw. Oftentimes it was mundane things about the price of bread or the price of gas or problems at work. But I remember particular one Sunday when someone brought a Look magazine to church. And in that magazine there was pictures of World War II. And suddenly the adults' voices took on a very serious tone. And they started to literally share their war stories. And I listened. I listened to some of them who told each other how they had doubts and fears during that time, how God had seen them through, and others how it left scars, where they still wondered how a good God could allow those things to happen. Those stories made quite an impression upon me. So much an impression that when, years later, I served as a chaplain, I heard those stories again from dying GIs. It was their last memory, and I remembered the stories I heard as a kid. I remember how people kept their faith in spite of some of their doubts, and it ministered to me. You know, there might be people who have Christian testimonies where they said they've never had a doubt and never had a fear. Or maybe they accepted Christ so young they never remember a time not knowing Jesus, and since then have never doubted him. And those are good testimonies, but I have to tell you and be honest, they don't help me as much. I like the testimony of a Christian who suffered doubt and fear and came through anyway. You know, when the Apostle Paul shared his testimony, he often called himself the least of these, and he wasn't using a hyperbole. He was being honest. He often followed his testimony by saying that he was the one who went around dragging men, women, and children off to prison for their faith. His testimony was negative, but it was a great testimony because he was saying, if God could even save me, he can save you too. In Philippians chapter 3, the Apostle Paul gives his testimony. And his testimony here is how he tried to earn his salvation. He says, if anyone thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, that meant he was circumcised so he could be in the ministry as a Pharisee. Of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew among Hebrews. In regards to the law, a Pharisee, for zeal persecuting the church, for legalistic righteousness faultless. But whatever was my profit, I now count loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Jesus Christ, my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider these things rubbish, that I may gain Jesus. Only Paul could say that because he tried to earn his salvation. Now I know for the last couple of weeks, you've been listening to our services, either on the radio or through Facebook. And they might seem a little bit too smooth and produced to some of you. Last time we were recording the music, I remember one of our musicians saying how they longed during the moment of silence to hear a pew creak like it does in real worship when someone shifts their weight, or a child cry or whine, or someone get up and leave. Nothing can replace the fellowship of each other. But we're seeking to still provide a meaningful worship service. And in order to do that, wouldn't it be wonderful to have some Christian testimonies? So I want to challenge you today that if you have a testimony, and it doesn't have to be perfect, a time where you doubted God, a time where you feared, or a time where you've trusted God, and you'd like to share it to the rest of the body of believers, could you record it on your telephone? And after you record it on your telephone, can you send it to me at ckincaid@chapelbythelake.org. That's CKINCAID at chapelbythelake.org. And we're going to send it on to the people who produce our worship services. Until then, trust Jesus Christ. This time isn't going to go on forever. There will be a time when we'll meet each other again, and worship will be back in session. But until then, keep your individual worship alive. Keep your love with Jesus alive. Things may change in this life, but God's love will never change for you. So keep that alive. Amen.